have the honor of introducing our second keynote speaker of today, Mr. Richard Kauffman. As everybody probably is aware, Mr. Kauffman joined Governor Andrew Cuomo's administration in February 2013 as the chairman for Energy and Finance. In this capacity, he oversees and coordinates energy policy with energy agencies and public authorities. His mission is to develop and implement a strategic plan for the clean energy economy by developing financial, legislative, and regulatory policies that focus on scaling up clean energy, while ensuring that the energy infrastructure is resilient and reliable. He has worked in energy and finance at some of the highest levels in both the private and public sector. Prior to his current appointment, Mr. Kauffman served as Senior Advisor to Secretary Stephen Chu at the U.S. Department of Energy. He was also Chief Executive Officer of Good Energies, Inc., a leading investor in renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies, a partner of Goldman Sachs, where he chaired the Global Financing Group and was Vice Chairman of Morgan Stanley's Institutional Securities Business and co-head of its banking department. Mr. Kauffman has also served as board chairman of Levi Strauss & Co., as well as on the boards of several organizations, including the Brookings Institution and the Wildlife Conservation Society. He is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Mr. Kauffman holds a bachelor's degree from Stanford University, a master's degree in international relations from Yale University, and a master's in public and private management from the Yale School of Management. He will be taking questions after his remarks, and I'm actually standing on my tippy toes, so I'm happy to give you the stage. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ellie, and thank you all for being here. I can tell you she really Ellie was standing on her tiptoes. So I want to talk about cleaning products. And I want to talk actually specifically about one cleaning product, Febreze. And I'm not talking about it because it's a petrochemical. I know you've been talking about the energy sector broadly. I want to talk about it because it's an interesting story about how it got into the market. So the people at Procter & Gamble realized that people were working more and more and had less time to do house cleaning. And in particular, men were not doing much house cleaning. So they have some good scientists at P&G, and they came up with a product that actually did more than just mask odors, but it actually would destroy odors. So like a good consumer products company that P&G is, they had focus groups, and they showed a lot of stinky kind of items to men that sat around tables, and they asked the men, is this a good product? Yes. Does it work? Yes. Would you buy it? Yes. They put it in the store, and it didn't really sell. So they changed the packaging a little bit, did some more focus groups. Does this product work? Yes. Is it effective? Yes. Would you buy it? Yes. They put it back in the stores, and very few people bought it. So this was a real puzzle. So the researchers at P&G said, well, what we got to do is we got to really go back and figure out what's going on here, and let's find the stinkiest places we can find and really investigate people that live with odors. So you can imagine that was an interesting conversation to figure out where those places were, but they decided that it was really people that had, the dozen cats. And when they visited people that lived in very stinky places, they made an interesting discovery, which is that people that live in really stinky places don't smell it. So they're about ready to give up on the product when somebody said, well, you know, there are actually people that are buying the product. So let's go find those people. And there was the surprise. Because it turned out the people that weren't using the product, the people that weren't women, excuse me, weren't men, but they were women. And in fact, it wasn't the people that were poor housekeepers, it was the people that were good housekeepers. And what was happening is that women, in this case, they were women that bought the product, after they did a thorough job cleaning a room, they sprayed Febreze as a finishing touch, as a treat. And that's how they use the product. And so that completely changed the way that P&G thought about the product. They amped up the amount of fragrance. They changed the advertisement away from solving a problem to it being more about a pleasant experience. And that meant Febreze, it turned Febreze into a blockbuster product. So the reason I'm telling you that story is because Febreze was more than that there was a product need and a good product. It was trying to figure out what the trigger was to make customers buy. So as we think about the future energy infrastructure we want to build in New York, we need to take a page from consumer marketing and figure out what consumers want, and to figure out, in particular, market segmentation and what are the triggers of buying behavior of different categories of customers. Because consumer products companies recognize that not all customers are the same. And I hear a lot for people in our industry about C&I or multifamily or residential. These are customer classifications. These are not customer segments. And segmentation relates to motivations that trigger buying behaviors. And the most effective segments are defined by the emotional, how somebody feels about buying a good or service. So it seems to me that the Febreze story highlights a missing link as we think about energy policy, technology, and infrastructure. We know that technology is moving rapidly, permitting a transition from an electricity push model to a pull model, one that can give individuals and communities more value. When we say value, what do we mean? It means it could save customers money. When we say more value, it means it could provide more resiliency or more power, better power quality. It can reduce emissions and create economic growth, this new system. And it's also good, this new energy system, it's not just about energy infrastructure. It can relate to other infrastructures, it can relate to the water system, it can relate to broadband, it can relate to transportation. But we're not moving fast enough in terms of reducing our emissions or achieving the promise of economic growth, or even in rebuilding the infrastructure that we have today that's aging. And that's not even to mention our ability to adopt infrastructure to innovation cycles. Because current infrastructure thinking is very long-term in life, and innovation cycles are getting shorter and shorter. So how do we connect faster innovation cycles with what has been long-lived infrastructure? If we're going to build new infrastructures, systems around people, we need to figure out how to engage people. And I'm talking about not just residential customers. The irony about the electricity system, for you historians, is, of course, Edison thought electricity was just going to be about lighting. He never could have anticipated what was wrought by electricity, and we have the opportunity today to do the same thing. We have to help imagine what this new future electricity system could mean in terms of its services and value to all of us. Because the way we're going now isn't probably going to work. because the simple fact is most customers don't seem to care enough. So we act in the energy area that most customers are motivated by dollars and cents. And in the state of New York, the average electricity bill is about 2.5% of somebody's budget. We can do better, but that alone is not going to move the needle. 70% of the housing stock in New York State is more than 70 years old. At the current rate of programs that we have to provide incentives, it will take 550 years to retrofit the housing stock in New York State. Nor is the environment a primary motivator, as much as we would like it to be. I think it's a nice to have, but how much customers are willing to pay for it, certainly some number of customers are willing to. But if you look at the penetration of green power, which everybody in New York State can do if they want, through their electricity distribution company, Con Ed in New York City, it has a very low penetration. Doesn't cost that much more. If it was really important, people would do it. So let's look at where things are working in markets and make some hypotheses in terms of market segmentation. So while purchasing of green power has low penetration, solar is growing. So what does this mean? Well, could it mean that there are some categories of customers that seek independence or want to stick it to the man? Or maybe they want to be seen as virtuous. And we could look at the Prius and its penetration relative to other hybrids. You want to be able to have other people see what you do. And then there's the solar lease, which has revolutionized the residential solar market. And there are lots of good reasons from a finance standpoint why people may be interested in doing that. But it's also about making something easy. And maybe there's a category of customers that like to want to do things, but it's got to be easy for them, and just giving them a bunch of information isn't going to motivate them. We can also think about what's happened when communities have gotten involved. A number of communities have solarized, or in the state of New York, we have Energize, which gets involved with energy efficiency. When communities get organized, not only lowers customer acquisition costs, but maybe something else is going on. Maybe it's the FOMO effect. I'm too old to understand what the FOMO effect is without my children telling me, but that means, for you older types, it means the fear of missing out. And I think most of you know now that the sign in the hotel room about hanging up your towels, save the planet, isn't the effective sign. It's 75% of the people that stayed in the room hung up their towel is more effective. The tribe motivation may be more important than the planet motivation. There are some companies in the UK that sell energy efficiency by driving up and down the street, looking at the heat loss of the house, and then they stop in and tell people that they're wasters. I'm not suggesting that that is a good model in the United States, but it says something about motivation. So it's not just residential or retail customers. You can think about commercial industrial customers, and there are segments. You could see that there must be the make it easy crowd, certainly the independents. Maybe there's a category of commercial industrial customers that want to go home and tell their children that they did something good. Consumer marketing companies will tell you that there aren't dozens of segments. But the better we get at recognizing segments and designing solutions for each, the better and faster we're going to have market adoption. A couple of other marketing thoughts. The term of art, maybe it's not a term of art, but the term that's typically used for assessing the promise of energy efficiency in a building is called an audit. And I want you to think about it from a marketing standpoint. When government gets involved and says, we're going to come to your house and do an audit, can we possibly be surprised that we don't get the market uptake that we want? We have a long ways to go in this area. And the other point I'd make, finally going back to the Febreze story, is that for those that have been following Febreze, they've had to follow the market. They had a $1 billion plus product. They've had to keep changing their market message, and now they've gone back to the stinky socks. And so we have to think about that as well. So I hope that this story and some of these thoughts give you a flavor of how we want to approach energy policy. I think the first point is we want to look at the whole bill. And when we look at the whole bill, we see that there are a number of market gaps and distortions and regulatory disincentives that we want to work on. So I'll give you a few examples. The first is that there's nobody in this, no institution really worried about the whole bill. Unless a customer is a large, can afford a large ESCO, there's nobody in New York State that's worrying about your bill because power costs are passed through. Another example of a market failure or distortion is in wholesale markets. Capacity markets, because New York has a deregulated market for generation, and I know that there are some people in the room that spend a lot of time on this question, but capacity markets give short-term price signals against what are be long-term capital commitments for infrastructure. That doesn't work very well. Another problem with wholesale markets is it doesn't take into account distributed generation or energy efficiency very well. And it also assumes that demand is fixed and therefore the market has to provide supply. And it doesn't really take into account the promise of what ought to be a two-way market, because other markets respond between supply and demand. And so it's not a dynamic market. And so some of this, of course, is going to involve us having to work with FERC. But the whole question about currently what is a clean line of demarcation between wholesale and retail markets really is a market distortion. We could also look at market gaps or regulatory incentives that relate to distribution utilities. So again, that would be a Con Ed in New York City. Utilities, we incented in order to achieve universal coverage, back in the earlier 20th century, we focused on the amount of capital that they deployed, and that's largely the way we still compensate utilities. Not really a focus on efficiency of the system. Con Ed's average capacity utilization, as it were, is about 50%. 55%, between 50 and 55%. And that's because the system is built for the hottest hours of the year. The rest of the time, that capital lies idle. And for you business students here, you know that the last 30 years of history of finance has been about capital efficiency in industry, except for the utility industry. And the other distortion is when we have an emphasis on capital, and regulating utilities based upon capital, it substitutes capital for operating things. And so we might be able to achieve more efficiency in the system if we provided incentives that didn't have that distortion. It also has a bias towards investing in things that have long lives and can be depreciated over long term, because that moderates rates, which means that things like software and the latest software or latest technology that would be depreciated very quickly, that might have a benefit to customers, or there's a disincentive for doing that, because the near-term costs might be higher even though the long-term benefits would be greater. So we want to focus on markets. We want to focus on markets because that's what's going to make things go faster. Market forces are very powerful. And so we want to work on areas where we can remove market barriers. We are very focused on trying to figure out how we can draw in more innovation in markets. We want to draw in more innovation because, as we talked about before, in order to imagine this new energy future, we can design all the rules we want, but if we don't get innovators thinking about how to take advantage of the opportunity, we're not going to engage the market. We also want to figure out how we can get more leverage on ratepayer funds. So when we talk about the bill, it's not a very big part of the bill, but it is part of the bill. We collect money, the state authorities collect money for a variety of renewable energy and energy efficiency programs, and we want to see if we can get more leverage on that money, how we can use grants as a bridge to animate markets. So we have a green bank that we're just setting up, and the intent there is to reprogram ratepayer funds to capitalize a green bank, and that the green bank will work in areas of financing market gaps so we can get leverage from the private sector financiers. Our solar program, we're revising so the subsidy is related to volume, and in working with the industry, once certain volume and scale is achieved, the industry will not require any further support from the state. We can't predict the future. That's another principle that we want to follow. It's just too complicated. What we need to do is to set some broad rules and market signals and try to remove regulatory incentives and let market actors work as best as they can. In order to do that, we hope to engage with the private sector better than we have. So, if we can do all these things, I'm hoping that at the end we'll be able to give ourselves all a nice shot of Febreze as a reward. So with that, thank you, and I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have.
Just a brief question. What do you think of a publicly owned grid?
I'm sorry, what do I think of
What do you think of a publicly owned grid, electrical grid?
Why don't you tell me what you tell me what you think about?
There were so many issues around the grid and the limits to what is accessed by distributed, and a lot of folks don't even understand how the grid works. But in any case, because we own our highways and the public roadways, the grid is, in a sense, a roadway for electricity. And I wonder what your views are on that. Thank you.
Well, I think this goes to the broader question about regulatory incentives. I mean, and some of the grid, by the way, a very large portion of the transmission grid in the state of New York is owned by the state in the form, NYPA owns that, the New York Power Authority. So we actually do have, out on Long Island Power Authority, the whole electric system is owned by the state. So we actually do own some things, and it doesn't really change the basic dynamics, which is that you have areas where there are natural monopolies, and you have to figure out how you're going to attract capital to provide the improvements you want to make in the grid, and you also have to figure out what should be regulated and what shouldn't be regulated, and what can be competitive. And so I'm not really convinced inherently that the form of ownership matters in terms of the problems you're trying to solve. Is that somebody coming here? Okay. Fire away.
I have a question regarding the different incentives NYSERDA are introducing to the solar industry. as much as it's been very helpful to generate businesses and jobs in the region, it's been inconsistent in terms of how frequent they're being introduced. It's usually short term, they run out pretty quickly, and it creates this gold rush mentality.
Right.
And every time something's been introduced, it's being dried out pretty quickly. Usually as the regulators, you should, what is your view in terms of creating a more long-term program to help us developers do better financials? I mean, we hire most of our people on short-term contracts because we don't know what's going to happen next, so it's kind of create this, everything is very, very short-term versus a long-term perspective.
Well, so I think that David Sandelos here and my colleague from the Department of Energy, so I think all of us involved in government know the problem of stop-start incentives on the industry. So what I was talking about before in terms of New York Sun is exactly intended to address the problem that you outline, and the idea is that it's going to provide a long-term clarity of support for the solar industry. It's based upon volume, and so once a certain volume is achieved, scale has taken place, which reduces cost. It means that the next level of lower incentive kicks in. And so we believe that this is something that's going to provide a long-term signal for the private sector to make a commitment to New York, and it also, again, provides a path to the industry not requiring any support from the state. And this goes to the point about, one of the challenges that a state has in providing support is that, and it's something that we're thinking about, is that a state that's even as large as New York can do very little in terms of lowering hardware costs. So we can do a lot in terms of reducing soft costs, everything from permitting to financing to customer acquisition costs. There are lots of things we can do. And so if we're going to lower the soft costs, and if we're going to lower costs, we have to use our incentive dollars very sparingly, because we don't have enough money and a big enough market to be able to move the market except in these limited ways. So when I talk about leverage on our support programs, one of the ways in which we can lever it is by providing a long-term signal and using support programs as a bridge to markets, self-sustaining markets.
Harking back to your comment on marketing and Febreze, I'm wondering whether, for example, I think there are more like 50 to 100 different toothpastes, but two of them, Colgate and Crest, probably occupy the lion's share of the market. And then if you do the research I did a few years ago, they have the line research of advertising dollars. And so the question is, what comes first, the market or the dollars? I'm wondering if what you were suggesting before was that NYSERDA be more proactive in getting people to adapt or adopt energy, both energy renewal and cost-saving approaches in the same way that no one in this room, and I'm sure many people smoke, some people smoke cigarettes, they know better than to light up, not because it's against the law, but because they know we now consider it offensive. Could we not develop programs that would literally drive the point home about getting energy, solar energy, and becoming more cost-effective and energy efficient? I mean, this is something that could be within NYSERDA's domain.
Well, so I think the point that I'm trying to make about grant programs is what is a bigger bang for the buck? And I don't know the answer to the question, but I have a hypothesis. Are we better to provide, I'm talking about now at the margin, an incremental dollar to provide more subsidy for a renewable energy project, or are we better to take that incremental dollar and use it to help support solarization of a community, whereby you lower customer acquisition costs, which have to be borne by the projects that are taken on, and by increasing the number of projects, you lower the installation costs. And I think the point is that we have to think about ways in which we can use grant dollars to animate markets. And we have to look at a range of intermediaries that are making progress with customers and markets, however they're doing it, and think about providing incentives to enable them as opposed to the state itself being the market. This is the problem, I think, with a lot of government policy, is that when the state becomes the market, it ultimately doesn't become a very big market. It can't become a very big market. Not if we want to achieve what we want to achieve. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thinking about consumers. So one of the challenges in environmental debates is what economists call the Jevons paradox. Is if we get more efficient in the production of certain resource, we tend to consume it more. So thinking about in the future years, when we get more efficient in the production of energy, but if consumers tends to increase the way they consume, so the question would be, what do you think should be the role of either the government or utilities in try to create some kind of awareness of trying to develop some kind of education to consumers to deal or to cope with this issue?
Well, I guess I'd say a couple things. I mean, the first thing I'd say is that there's already been a decoupling, or almost certainly a change in the historical relationship between economic growth and electricity consumption. So it is, something is going on. It's one of the things that's putting pressure on different parts of the utility industry, is because they really look out at an era of very flat, if not declining, growth for electricity. So I think that, I understand, and look, all this will be revealed over time, but I think it's certainly true that we have found more and more ways to use electricity, because after all, electricity is a very valuable, it's a very valuable commodity, and so we are going to find more and more ways to use it because electronics enable us to do that. But I think I'm not sure that there are lots of things that I lay up at night worrying about. This is not one of them, because I think that we can move. We have so many opportunities for energy efficiency, I think, and so much great technology that's available, it's simply just not being deployed, that I think we, in terms of how we can use energy more efficiently, that I think we can stay ahead of any rebound. Fred, do you agree with that?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I am afraid that's the end of Mr. Kauffman's session.
Okay,
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.